Everyone knows that being in a cult is bad. You don't want to drink the Kool-Aid, you don't want to go to a Dianetic audit, and you definitely don't want to get sucked into a cult of personality. The word itself has a negative and dirty connotation. It brings to mind people trying to summon demons in their basement. It wasn't always this way, though. In fact, cults used to be the de facto religious orders of the day. Cult itself is shorthand for cultus deorum, which is roughly translated to cultivation of the gods. And there was once an abundance of cults dedicated to various gods in the time of the Romans. Damn near everything had a cult. Not just popular deities like Jupiter, but also famous figures of the time, and even myths such as the tale of Orpheus had cults dedicated to their reverence. However, the rise of Christianity in the Roman Empire would see most of these cults dismantled and labeled as foul paganry, thus creating the negative stigma around the word that continues on to our present day. Cults. They're a bad thing. In its place, we have come to know religion as the term for a spiritual belief system. Unlike cult, which comes with the baggage of millennia of negative use, religion is a neutral word that only takes shape based on the adjectives around it. This gets us into all sorts of fun semantic debates about the status of various spiritual ideologies. Is Scientology a cult or a religion? Is Mormonism a cult? How about Catholicism? We can all certainly agree that groups such as Heaven's Gate were bona fide cults, but when it comes to organized religious institutions, it suddenly becomes a fierce debate. What makes one ideology a quote-unquote true religion, and not just a really big cult? Obviously, this conversation is entirely semantic and not objective in the slightest, and yet it is still an interesting one that has some influence on our perception of the world. I myself have struggled with where to draw the line between a religion and a cult, but I'm fairly certain in my conclusion. The difference between a religion and a cult is that a religion benefits its followers' society, whereas a cult does not. Let me break down my thought process. In my view, spirituality is a tool of humanity. We would not have developed and cultivated all of these uncountable belief systems, both known and lost to time, if they did not have some evolutionary benefit for our ancestors. If spirituality had no benefit, we wouldn't be so spiritually inclined as a species. It's really that simple. Totems, mounds, and megalithic structures were created at a huge cost of resources and energy. The positive morale influence of these spiritual objects must have far outweighed the incredible labor required. That is a sign of religion being a useful tool for keeping society happy, even if there is a cost. Currently, there are only around 1 to 2 billion atheists out of the 7.75 billion humans on Earth, which means that at best, only a quarter of the world's population would say they are not spiritual. Whether it's a big organized religion or simple ancestor veneration, the majority of all humans who have ever lived would say that they believe in some form of God or spirits. That doesn't happen by chance. Humans are a naturally superstitious lot. It's part of our defense mechanisms to keep us alive and out of danger. You may not actually break your mother's back stepping on a crack, but you definitely won't trip on one if you're avoiding it. You may not be haunted by bad luck if you walk underneath a ladder, but you certainly won't have it fall on top of you if you're walking around it. Turning basic life lessons into superstitions prevents future accidents in your society without a lot of elaboration on why you shouldn't do certain things. Turning these superstitions into full-blown spiritual ideologies is just the natural evolution, in my view. There is no greater example of this than the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament. If you lift the spiritual aspects out of the Old Testament, it becomes apparent that the scripture is really serving two purposes. It's a history of the Jewish people and their contemporaries, and it is a survival guide for those that lived in the Levant millennia ago. The first 5 books of the Bible form the Torah, the books of law, and they dictate God's rules for the Israelites living at the time. The 10 Commandments are the most famous of these laws, and they include gems such as respect your parents, don't murder, don't cheat on your spouse or with another person's spouse, don't steal, don't lie, and don't be jealous of other people's stuff. While these are all very basic morals to us, at the time it apparently was not, because they felt the need to write it down and declare them to be of the greatest importance. There are many more laws in the Torah, and there are some truly fascinating purity laws, which have instructions for things like cleaning yourself after a penis infection. Somebody had to figure out how to deal with that in a time before medical knowledge or even sanitation was well spread. Think about that one next time you're in the shower. But while that stuff is neat, the food laws are what really drive home the survival guide aspect to the Torah. The 3rd book of the Torah, Leviticus, features many very specific instructions on the preparation and consumption of food, such as the bans on eating camels, pigs, carrion birds, and shellfish. There are strict guidelines on not drinking water that is contaminated by dead animals, nor should you use contaminated water in cooking or even growing food. Any animal with paws is considered unclean and inedible, as are most rodents and lizards. They can eat any animal that has a divided hoof and that chews cud, but the rest are unclean with only a few exceptions. These seemingly random guidelines are actually quite practical if you're living in a pre-sanitary, pre-germ world. It's mostly pretty obvious advice to not eat things that will make you sick, but without any scientific reasoning, instead they go to a spiritual reasoning. You shouldn't eat a vulture because carrion birds are full of diseases and bacteria the human body can't process since these birds sit around eating dead corpses all day, but these ancient humans wouldn't know that. Instead, it was through simple powers of observation and deduction that led to these conclusions, and to get them to stick, they needed a holy stamp. Codifying these eating laws into a spiritual tradition ensures that they will be remembered and upheld, and this likewise keeps the community safe from something as simple as food poisoning. Thus, the population of Jewish society would grow, or at the very least remain stable, and the religion sustains itself as well through this success as it gains more followers by birth, and from outsiders saying, "Hey, those guys are doing pretty well. I wonder why that is," and popping over for a look. This is essentially my benchmark for religion. If your community managed to survive and thrive with the presence of an organized spirituality, it was very likely in part because of that spirituality. In my eyes, that is the mark of a good religion, and a true religion. Contrast with something like Heaven's Gate, a spiritual ideology that led to everyone dying. Clearly, that is not healthy for the community. That's not a religion, it's a cult. Jim Jones and his followers likewise ended everything with mass suicide because of their rabid faith in Jim's beliefs. Not good. That's a cult. In the 80s, an Indian guru by the name of Rajneesh created a community for his followers in Oregon. They subsequently poisoned the rest of the town's food to keep them from voting in local elections so they could run everything. This is quite bad, both for the believers and the non-believers. Cult! Here's where it gets dicey, though. What about Mormonism? That is a hot topic these days, and there are plenty of ex-Mormon stories out there of people who've claimed that the religion is restrictive, abusive, and all around not worthwhile. But is it a cult? I would say that by contemporary standards, yes, Mormonism is a cult. However, the caveat is that it was once a religion, but it simply degraded over time to turn into a cult. Mormonism was founded in 1830 and was deeply entrenched with the pioneer Wild West lifestyle of the time. They moved from New York to Ohio, to Illinois, and to eventually what would become Utah. There they established a completely isolated settlement governed by the church bishops. Colonization was viewed as a religious duty, as well as a commonwealth and an interest in sharing in general. When other settlers eventually made their way to the Mormon lands, their community was found to be greatly attractive, and many chose to stay and convert. It's also worth noting that the Mormon practice of polygamy was at its peak here, which contributed to the growing population as well. The Mormon people were thriving out in the middle of nowhere, and their religion is what inspired the entire endeavor. That is the mark of a successful and beneficial religion in my eyes, and not a cult. However, when we flash forward to the modern day, Mormonism is not exactly the greatest of religions. What good is a pioneering spirit in an age when everything is settled? What good is polygamy when the world population is overflowing and raising a child is more expensive than ever? Not to mention Mormonism never successfully spread itself outside of Utah in a few scant overseas missions. These basic issues, along with the social restrictions placed upon its followers, has turned this once helpful religion into a hindrance. Also, they're racist, which is pretty fucking uncool now more than ever. Simply put, this religion did not adapt with the times, which is a very common issue. Now, it's a cult. Here's a good example that applies to nearly every religion. Most religions worldwide will very loudly declare, "No sex before marriage." This cuts down on promiscuity by quite a bit, as you might imagine. There was a lot of practicality behind it, being that condoms and birth control didn't exist in wide supply at the time. Yes, you could use a goat's intestine as a condom, but how many goats do you have that you can make a new condom every time? And also, do you really want to wear a fucking goat intestine as a condom? I think not. Not to mention the mother's life being ruined if they have a baby out of wedlock. That's a surefire way to have a deadbeat dad who leaves and won't claim the baby. Not like they had paternity tests beyond squinting at the baby and saying, it kinda looks like you. Plus, think about how scary STDs are now. Now imagine it's 2,000 years ago before people bathed regularly and nobody knew the basics of modern day hygiene. Do you really want to go around fucking a lot of people when that's the standard of the day? I do not. But guess what? now we have all of that. Condoms, birth control, knowledge of period and ovulation cycles, paternity tests, ultrasounds, Plan B, showers, and abortion clinics if you really need it. Essentially, the natural consequences of sex can be totally avoided with the simplest of ease. So while it's still great to have a baby with someone you are certain is going to stick around and take care of it, you really don't need to worry about having a baby by accident in the first place. I know it still happens, I can just look at my Facebook to see evidence of that, but the risk of an accidental pregnancy is so much lower than back in the day when your only option was to do it raw every time. What I'm saying is that no sex before marriage, not a necessary rule in the modern day. Not in a first world country, at least. Sorry, just isn't. That's one of those old school religious virtues that just really isn't needed in a practical sense now because of technological advancement. These are the sorts of things that major religious institutions need to think very hard about softening on, because if people don't believe in it, then they won't be going along with the church. That's not to say that they'll just turn into complete atheists immediately, but I can guarantee that some new form of spiritual thinking will arise to take its place. Just look at the boom of Buddhism and all sorts of Eastern ideologies in America during the 60s as a part of the social backlash against conservative Christian values. All it takes is some guru to pop up and yell, "Free love!" and they get a crowd of admirers immediately. As our greater society changes and grows, certain ideals become more attractive and others less. It's as simple as it gets. All of that is a lead-in to the final question. Is Catholicism a cult? And to that, I definitively say, no. Catholicism is not a cult, it is still a religion. I say this because despite those restrictive social rules it places on people, Catholicism still succeeds as a means of gathering people together and aiding society at large. Catholic organizations that give aid and house the homeless are innumerable. Their foreign aid is massive. They are the single largest charity on earth right now. Holidays like Christmas and Easter are not going away anytime soon because people love them as a part of the greater culture, even if the religious significance is slowly eroding away. The fact that it's a global religion inclusive of all races certainly helps, and the fact that a Catholic from anywhere on the globe can go to any other country, except for North Korea, find a local Catholic church, and fit in with ease, adds to the communal spirit. The church has social restrictions that are essentially equivalent to the Mormons, seeing as they are the original source, but while the Mormons are stuck going up against just American society, the Catholic Church contends with the entire rest of the world. American society is far more progressive than most nations, despite what the doomers will tell you. America is one of 29 nations that has legalized gay marriage, out of 195 countries around the world, for some clarity. So in the grand scheme of things, the Catholic Church is not entirely out of touch socially yet. It is certainly on the decline, but I cannot in good conscience call it a cult. Ultimately, the line between a religion and a cult is whatever your moral line is. Whether you revere or fear one of these religions, please remember that this is all completely subjective, and there is no firm description of what makes something a cult. These are like, just my opinions, man. But I hope you all at least learned something new today, and can maybe appreciate some of the positives of spirituality, along with the negative. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Oh my god, I just realized I got to the end of the video and I never actually talked about Scientology. Scientology is a cult. Scientology is a cult. 100% they're a cult. Stay the fuck away from Scientology. Those guys are fucking evil. Okay, now the video is done.